Hello and welcome back to Post Traumatic Revelations. I am your host, Afrah Caraballo, and in today's episode, we are looking at peace allergies. Now, last episode, we talked about love allergies and how, as trauma survivors, we really struggle to understand what love is. We have a hard time trusting and allowing that sticky, messy, healing balm that is love in our lives. Post traumatic healing requires a sense of safety. And I've said this before, and I truly, truly believe it that no safety, no healing, right? If you don't feel safe, healing's not going to happen because you're in a state of survival, in a state of crisis. And healing requires rest. Healing requires that you stop and be with the damage, be with the wound. So, so often we find ourselves stuck in this post traumatic survival mode, which usually looks like a bunch of maladaptive coping strategies, these maladaptive behaviors that end up earning us labels like asshole, bitch, alcoholic, workaholic, addict, control freak, depressed, anxious, bipolar, OCD, PTSD. And what all these labels, what all these behaviors have in common is this illusion of control. Like we want to feel in control of our bodies again. We want to feel in control of our lives again, post traumatically. And so if you look at these labels, that there's disorder in the label, right? As in post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, or borderline personality disorder, or oppositional defiant. Oh, one of my least favorites, right? Oppositional defiant disorder or mood disorder. And the disorder doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you. What the disorder is disorganized information. So, disorganized thoughts, disorganized emotions, disorganized feelings, disorganized behaviors. There's this disorganized or mismatched or overreaction to a situation that's happening around us or to us. And these overreactions are really, truly attempts to feel safe again. In our post traumatic, disordered state of mind, we behave in ways that don't necessarily serve us well. In that post-traumatic state of mind, we're thinking, best defense is a good offense. So, in this defensive state, we repel, we avoid, we reject any potential perceived danger like love, peace, and peace. What a slippery little elusive concept. And if you look up the word peace, you'll find words like calm and tranquil and freedom from disturbance, the absence of war or conflict. Einstein is quoted as saying, peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice, law, order, in short, the presence of government. And Maybe he was influenced by the environment he was in at the time, namely World War II. And while I agree with Einstein's concrete, logical definition of peace, I believe there's more, right? I believe that peace is more than external structures like laws, rules, government, or the absence of war. I believe that peace is an internal knowing. I believe there's an internal freedom that can be accessed by each and every one of us. I believe peace is the freedom to say yes to life, the freedom to live without fear, worry of loss. So I wonder, what is peace for you? What does peace mean to you? If peace is freedom to say yes to life, the freedom to be, if peace is the freedom to be you, whatever you decide that is, freedom to be a dancer, a singer, a writer, a politician, freedom to be male, female, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, freedom to be Buddhist. If peace is the freedom to be all of who you are without fear of loss, and I believe it is, then yes. Short answer is yes. We all have some degree of peace allergies because there is some resistance to fully expressing because we're social beings, because we all have some kind of overreaction, some unnecessary defensiveness toward peace because we have a history of trauma. We've all had our peace, our sense of self, our sense of wholeness disrupted, right? Intentionally or unintentionally, we have all experienced a loss to our sense of wholeness, our sense of safety, our sense of place and space in the world, because that's what trauma does. Rich, poor, old, young, big, small, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, believer, non believer, trauma doesn't care. It leaves a hole. And if that hole isn't healed, we develop habits and behaviors to numb the pain, to delay healing, to avoid the pain of that loss, to avoid the pain of that hole. And since what is lost has to either be healed or numbed out, we develop these strategies, right? And peace, that sense of peace, that's not something a trauma victim or trauma survivor is readily going to embrace, right? Trauma victims, unhealed trauma survivors experience peace as a trap, as something that will eventually betray or hurt them, right? That so often we refer to peace as the calm before the storm, or um, just this weird, unsettling feeling. I remember a while back when I started doing my own trauma work, and the situation happened that would have usually sent me into control freak mode. Call, text, follow up, check this, check that. But this situation happened, and I noticed like this absence of anxiety, like this absence of the need to do something. And I remember thinking, is this what peace feels like? Is this emptiness? It felt like emptiness, not like a scary, painful emptiness, but it was just like where that bundle of anxiety usually sat in my chest, it just wasn't there. And so maybe for some people, peace is just the absence of anxiety. But yeah, that stuck with me and it just popped in my head right now. So I wanted to share this recollection with you. I remember having a conversation with a Navy SEAL, and this was many years ago. But I'm having this conversation with a Navy SEAL, and he said something that sticks with me to this day. We were talking about the concept of peace, and he says, "Peace? Peace? Yeah, the only peace I know is when I'm waiting in a plywood box for my mark." And I have learned a lot about the physiological effects of trauma since then. I've learned a lot more about how very subjective trauma is, and consequently, how very subjective the idea or the experience of peace is. I now know so much more about the individualized experience, expectations, desires, and aversions or rejections to the concept of peace. Peace is another one of those loaded words that we say we want, but we're not really sure what it means or what it is. Is peace more about freedom to be who you want to be? Or is it about laws and rules that govern who we are and how we express who we are? Is peace freedom to something or freedom from something? Or maybe peace is freedom for something? What do you think? I believe that peace, like love, is an experience, a sensation. I believe that peace is a state that all living things strive for. I think peace is a pre-verbal, I will go so far as to say a nonverbal state. Biologically, It's the state of equilibrium or balance, right? Part of Einstein's definition talked about the absence of war, and biology talks about uniformed motion or being at rest, that all these different parts are working together to this point of balance or equilibrium or zero action, right? That it chemistry talks about constant reactions of all elements that doesn't promise equal action, but consistency, so that all parts of the organism are working together to create this feeling of balance, right? That balance is something that we can measure scientifically, right? And peace is this feeling, this idea that, like love, we're not really sure what it is, but we know what it feels like, right? So, this balance or equilibrium is happening because of conscious choices. So, peace is not about the absence of action, but the ongoing, consistent, persistent effort to stay in balance, to stay in harmony with, right? That all the parts are working together, that the mind, the lungs, the brain, the stomach, the heart, the skin, the bones, the muscle structure, all of these parts of our bodies are working together to move us to where we want to go, right? To have this sense of consistent health, right? That peace isn't this passive word. Like a lot of times we think peace is just about sitting still, and that's part of it. But what it takes to sit still, like the work that it takes to be in balance, that's an ongoing work. If you're alive, you're constantly doing the work to address hunger, address bodily functions, address temperature, thirst, that there are steps that need to be taken to feel comfortable, right? And the absence of that or the inability to do that is what trauma is. It's a disruption in that peace, a disruption in the access to peace and safety. So, peace is like the mind, body, spirit, or the mind, body, soul, or the mind, body, emotion slash energy, whatever you want to call it. But peace is the conscious, internal, and external elements of the microscopic organism to the heart, to the body, to a couple, to a family, to a community, to a city, to a state, to a nation, to a world, to a planet, really. But peace is the conscious choice to balance, to harmonize, whether that's a cell or an individual or relationship, but it is the conscious choice to be in equilibrium, the conscious choice to balance, to live in harmony with, right? And harmony doesn't mean sameness, but it has the same goal of thriving, right? Not just surviving, but of living beyond just survival. So, peace is that conscious choice of a living thing to be balanced. And when there is a history of trauma, when there is a history of loss of that balance, then the body responds differently, right? And since we have cognition, the ability to reason, we also have the ability to delay or avoid healing. So if there's a history of loss, that balance has been damaged. Recovering the peace will certainly depend on the severity of that damage. Some unhealed trauma survivors, some trauma victims will decide that balance and peace is too risky, that harmony cannot be trusted. So post traumatic victims choose to live in a state of hypervigilance, space of defense over peace, defense over healing. Many trauma victims and unhealed trauma survivors equate peace with weakness. Somehow, hypervigilance feels more normal mentally, emotionally, chemically. That hyper state of awareness feels safer. It feels more safe, more balanced than peace. Peace feels like a threat. I've heard many people say it just feels like I'm a sitting duck, right? I need to stay alert. I need to be on guard. I need to be aware of everything. Have bars on doors, bars on windows, cameras everywhere, trying to stay ahead of any possible danger. And that uncertainty that comes with freedom is often too overwhelming for trauma victims. In the post traumatic body, rigidity, predictability, hypervigilance, or being numbed out feels better than peace and freedom and calm. For an unhealed trauma survivor, peace is a well guarded prison. For many, the prison feels safer. Post traumatic prisons feels like peace, peace from harm, and the freedom to not have to make any choices. The rules are known, limitations are enforced, freedom from the unknown, freedom from surprise. And we know, right, that trauma is a horrible, disgusting surprise. So it makes perfect sense that trauma victims and unhealed trauma survivors would choose the rigidity of prison over freedom and uncertainty. Self governing, internal balancing, self regulating. When you have a history of trauma and it's not healed, that's hard work, right? Trying to manage your mood, your thoughts, your feelings, your responses, your interactions with other people with unhealed trauma can be very difficult and very messy. And developing a strong sense of self is That's the stuff of religion, right? That worship and practicing religiously and communing with a higher power, getting support around that. There's this next level awareness that we hear about when we're talking about developing a stronger sense of self, right? Equilibrium is basic science, it's an innate attribute, it's an instinctual drive of all living things, arguably a close second to survival, right? All living things aim to survive. But peace is not just about survival, but it's about thriving. It's about harmonious collaboration of all parts, right? That if you're in crisis, if you've been traumatized, if you've been shot, the body immediately jumps into survival mode and start redistributing the flow of blood, sacrificing certain limbs to keep you alive, right? But when things are healed up and there's this state of equilibrium, of peace, then now the body is distributing blood again to all parts of the body, that all parts are now working together for optimal functioning, optimal living, optimal expression, that survival has already been addressed, right? So when we're talking about post traumatic survival, that's kind of crisis existence. And so when I'm talking about now looking at peace, this is why I added peace allergies, right? Because if we're still in survival mode, peace is not necessarily an option. Equilibrium, calm, safety, that's not necessarily an option if you still feel like you're in crisis mode, like you're in survival mode. So surviving is just reaching to your reacting, just reaching for your next breath, reaching for your next meal, right? That you're reacting to your environment. You're kind of almost at the mercy of your environment. There's not this sense of pro activity, there's reactivity, that you are literally in survival mode, that we're not thinking past survival. There's no sense of long term planning, right? Peace assumes that all needs are met, that you can rest and be at peace, right? Freedom to be all of who you are with no worry of loss, no worry of loss of resources, right? That, of course, on some level, there is, right, the ending of things, but peace is about knowing that even when things come to an end, wellness can continue, right? So it's not just reacting to the environment, but being in equilibrium and balance, allowing yourself to enjoy life. Peace is not just the absence of war, the absence of violence, or the absence of the threat, but it's the internal knowing, the intentional internal feelings of safety, even in the face of violence, even in the face of disorder and disruption. Biblically speaking, there's this phrase that talks about peace beyond understanding. And because we can be such complex beings, we have the ability to choose various forms of freedom. We can choose various forms of peace, various forms of love. We can choose to sacrifice one for the other. We can choose different degrees of peace and different degrees of compassion and different degrees of equilibrium that we can bargain and negotiate and compromise, right? Martin Luther King is quoted as saying, peace is the presence of justice. Wait, what? So, are we talking governmental justice or internal governing, right? And I think because we have cognition, we have the ability to even debate that, the presence of justice, right? And I know many students, many clients, friends, family, other trauma survivors. As a teacher, as a healer, as a therapist, I've witnessed and experienced how internal judgment, guilt, and shame can be more restrictive, more of a prison than any brick and mortar prison, right? That our internal thinking, our internal dialogue, our internal beliefs can imprison us. That we could be sitting in a palace, we can be sitting on the beach on vacation, we could be in some of the most visually peaceful places and still have a war raging inside, right? That we're judging, feeling guilty, and feeling shame for unresolved traumas, unresolved things that we've been through, so that internal prison is real. That long after the traumatic event, we're still having a hard time finding peace, finding freedom, that even in the freedom of vacation, remote islands, that you can have this internal prison going. And I've seen the opposite to be true, that prisoners can find peace and freedom even while physically still imprisoned, right? One of the most noted international examples of that is Nelson Mandela, right? That peace is not only a physical thing, but it's also a state of mind. So, back to the question, do you have peace allergies? Are you allergic to the calm, to the peaceful, to balance? Do you need the chaos to feel safe? Do you need the noise? Do you need the busyness to feel safe? Are you allergic to the quiet of peace? Do you feel this uneasiness when there is nothing that needs to be done, when nothing's happening? Can you trust the calm, or does it have to be the calm before the storm? Can it just be peace, or is it suspicious silence? As a mother, I have clear memories of feeling a sense of peace when the house was noisy. If you can hear the kids, they're fine, right? But if it's quiet, it's like, oh my goodness, what's happening? What are they doing? What are they into? right? And so there are different times and different reasons to feel the uneasiness or the suspicion that comes with the calm, that comes with the quiet. And so I'm inviting you to explore for yourself, what does peace feel like to you? Are you allowed to have it? Do you have permission to be at peace? How and when does your internal war end? What does peace feel like to you? What does peace sound like for you? Do you have permission to be at peace, to take a rest, to be in balance, in equilibrium? I want to thank you again for your time, your attention, and your permission. And I wish you love, peace, and healing. And until next time, be well.